I'm planning a summer-themed Warhammer campaign, which I know sounds kind of weird. What do the joys of summer have to do with anything Warhammer? I have 5 words: big mechs and big monsters. Y'all know the movie Pacific Rim. This movie had an absolute chokehold on me when I was in middle school. It's simple. Giant monsters invade, giant robots are made to fight them. It's epic. And it was a summer blockbuster. Now what does Warhammer have? Giant robots and giant monsters. But we need a summer setting, and Hong Kong at night isn't my first idea of a summer getaway. I need the monsters to come from somewhere in the campaign, and I really don't want to use portals. Easy enough. Where do monsters usually come out of? That's right, the ocean. I got this tabletop beach mat from Frontline Gaming, and it's really pretty to look at. Sure, it's nice, but now we need terrain to put on it. Well, a few years ago, I made these. I intended to make a whole jungle kind of map, but I never got around to it. That's okay though, the plants I picked happen to look great with this map. But I only made 4 of these, and this map is pretty big, so I just gotta make more, come on. I'm all out of these wooden plates, so it was off to ye old Michael's. Quick side note, is anyone else's local Michael's like disturbingly empty? Every time I go, there's only a few workers, and I'm one of like 5 people in the store. I fear for the future of retail. Anyway, here's what you'll need to make these beach-themed scattered terrain. You need these wooden plates. I also got these bigger ones. Be sure to pick ones that are at least mostly flat. Sometimes you'll find some that are warped. You'll also need Crayola air dry clay, or other air dry clays that you can buy in bulk for really cheap. Stuff like Milliput or Epoxy Sculpt is great too, but those materials are pretty expensive and you'll need a lot of clay for this project. Then you'll of course need the plants. You can visit your local dollar store for a bunch of small foliage. They'll be on these sort of frames that look like this. The trees and bigger brush specifically I found on Amazon. If you need to find materials more instantly though, you can try a pet store to look around for aquarium plants too. Lastly, all the easy stuff. Sand, white glue, Mod Podge, super glue, some small rocks. You could just go outside and pick some up. I use these corkscrew rocks from Army Painter. And lastly, brown, beige, gray, and white colored paint. If you're a crafter, you likely have all these things already. If not, any dollar store should have a lot of this stuff. Start by sanding the top of the plates to create some texture. They're usually pretty smooth, which will prevent the clay from sticking to the wood. Then start plopping on the clay. Future Kenny here warning you that I'm making a mistake here. You'll see it cost me dearly in a bit. I have a jar of water near me to sculpt it around. This Crayola clay in particular is pretty tough, so you really have to dig in there. I give them different mountain shapes, making sure they're tall enough to stick the plants into. Now I have 7 pieces to put together. To make it a bit easier on myself, I'm only making a few at a time. I leave them alone for the clay to firm up a bit. Right now they're all pretty soft from the water. I don't leave them alone for too long though, because we still need to stick in the plants later. After at least 15 or so minutes, I come back to them to brush on a half and half mixture of water and white glue. Quick sidebar, I had these 2 tubes of cheap tacky glue, both of which turned into a paste because it'd been so long since I used them. I found this bottle of Elmer's glue from 2011. God, I was 12. I followed that up by sprinkling sand on top of it. I find it's better to do this rather than dunk it into the sand. I think it makes it look more natural. Also, use more fine grit sand if you really want a beach look. Now, leave them alone again for another 15 minutes. Then make a mixture of water and Mod Podge. First, get your Mod Podge open. I actually haven't opened this in years. Thankfully, I found this random grip tool outside my house. Cool. Which actually worked, I'm surprised. Now, make your water and Mod Podge mixture. Just keep in mind how viscous Mod Podge actually is.
Ah, fuck, what the hell? What the fuck?
If you also made a mess, it'll be fine, just keep working. But, lesson learned. Mod Podge is a lot smoother than white glue. Brush that mixture carefully on top of the sand or use a spray bottle. If it can spray as a mist, that's even better. While it's still wet, we can start sticking in our plants. I went for 2 types. These pieces have these sort of bushes and these have trees. On the bigger plates, I put on everything. This is where your creative instincts will really kick in. Foliage and jungle and forest environments can grow to be very dense, but plant life can be sparing in some areas. Decorate these as much as you'd like with however much you want to put on. Be reasonable though. If you want to be able to put miniatures in them, you probably shouldn't crowd the pieces with too many plants. If that's the case, use some empty mini bases or just use your own minis as measurement so you know where to put some empty space. On the stem of each plant, I put on a bit of super glue to make them more secure. Just a heads up, super glue reacts to moisture by hardening faster. You might see this when the glue starts to come up to the surface as you push the plant in. Me, personally, I don't mind it. But if you want to avoid this, just be sparing with the amount of glue you put on the stem of the plant. After the sand, you can put on your rocks. Push them in a bit so they're not just sitting on top. Let them get into the clay. Put a bit of super glue on them as well so they're more secure. I like to be sparing with how many I put on. Now leave all of it alone for at least a few hours to overnight to dry. When you come back to it, the Mod Podge hardened all of the sand so it shouldn't kick off. And the clay should be solid. Now we can start painting. Of course, if you're fine with this look, you could just leave it here. It's sandy, your plants should look great, and it's sturdy enough to play with. It's game ready. I want them to match with the pieces I made before though. So I painted all of the sand brown, putting on a few more coats where necessary. Waited for all of it to dry, then went with a dry brushing of beige on top. It's fine if I can't reach the beige under the plants. I see those as shadows. To make the peaks of the sandhills, or dunes, a bit more prominent, I mix the beige with a bit of white paint to make it brighter. Then dry brush that on just the top of each dune. You could definitely paint this better, but I want to keep this simple. Lastly, the rim of each base looks pretty messy, so I went around each rim and painted it beige. And here, I'm calling it done. You could even kick it up a notch with different bits, like plant debris, skulls, a little treasure chest sticking out of the sand, maybe some glass bottles or, miniature glass bottles. You could try some water effects too. I like these products for water. They're easy to use and beats having to mix resin. And that's it. Or so I thought. The next morning when I came back to these, I saw this. The clay had cracked. My best guess as to why this happened is I didn't sand the bases enough. The clay didn't have enough grip and pulled in on itself as it was drying. That doesn't matter anymore though. What's done is done and I just gotta fix it. My solution was to fill in the cracks with super glue, sprinkle sand on top, and repaint those areas. You could also use texture paste to fill in the cracks, instead of having to huff super glue fumes. I would recommend this over glue and sand. Not gonna lie, this really sucked. I was about ready to film B-roll with these, and that motivation kinda crapped out. I'm rethinking the Crayola clay now. Maybe I do just have to bite the bullet and use Epoxy Sculpt or Milliput, which is way more expensive than the Crayola clay. But I've made terrain with Epoxy Sculpt and Milliput before, and it's never cracked on me. I dug up some old footage from this past project to show you a different method using Milliput, so you can try it and this cracking doesn't happen to you. For this, you'll need mostly the same materials, as well as hot glue, foam, and Milliput instead of Crayola clay. You could also use tin foil and or Epoxy Sculpt as substitutes. On top of your wood plate, put on some hot glue. Wait for the glue to cool a bit, then put on your foam, cutting it to fit the base. Pre-cutting your foam will make the application easier. If you're using tin foil, scrunch it up and lay it on top of the glue, making mound shapes. The foam and tin foil acts as filler so you don't use as much putty. Then, whether you're using Milliput or Epoxy Sculpt, mix up as much putty as you think you need. Take an equal amount from each container and mix them together. Now the chemical reaction has started and you have at least a few hours before it starts to get too firm to work with. Repeat the past steps from earlier and you have the same results with a different method. This is how I made the first pieces and to this day they haven't cracked. After looking back at how I made my first pieces, I noticed one step that I didn't do this time around was putting glue on the base itself. The clay needed something else to latch onto, not just sanded texture. But even then, I'm still not sure that would really work, because last time the Milliput was sitting on top of the foam, not just glue. So honestly, I don't know. I feel embarrassed having made a whole video showcasing this one material and it didn't work out as well as I intended, especially since I've used it before. But at least now you all know what not to do. Seeing some silver lining, I feel like the darker lines from repainting made it look like some kind of muddy trail, which I'm kinda okay with. Also, while I was at it, I decided to paint the rocks. Might as well. After all of that, here's everything all together. heroes are on vacation, an unheard of luxury in the 41st millennium. While the planet looks like a paradise, a terrible infestation is taking root. Looks like some mechanical power is needed. Even the locals have come out to fight, but the bugs have some muscle of their own. I love the look of this so much. It's so refreshing to see a bright Warhammer setting, since what we're used to is, grimdark, which is great, but I wanted to try out some new visuals. While I was building this, I was watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I loved every moment of it. It was really fun, and if you try to make some of this terrain, I hope you have as much fun as I did. This video was made in celebration of Kraken Week, which is like Shark Week, but Dungeons & Dragons themed. This week you'll see a bunch of D&D creators put up videos that are all nautical and ocean themed. While I personally feel very small in this space, I wanted to get in on it since I love the ocean, and this happened to have great timing with when I was getting ready for my summer campaign. I hope this gave you some ideas for some kind of D&D or Warhammer project. Happy Kraken Week, and have a great summer, Shaka Bra.